we're doing that for ourselves. So, any questions?
We'll hold questions to them at the end with both of you up
Okay,
together. So
fine.
I want to introduce Erik Johnson from Epicor. And while he's getting ready, Jitendra, I just wanted to say thank you. Working with you guys over the past few months has been a great learning experience for both of us, for both companies, as we really get a feel for the real-world scenarios that companies can solve and ISVs can solve using this platform. And I think you guys have showed a great example of two of the key workloads. The first being, how do you extend applications outside the boundaries? How do you connect across corporate boundaries? You saw that today in the keynote. You saw it again here in terms of managing identity systems, managing service bus and workflow between organizations, and really extending applications outside of the four walls. The second application, which you showed, the portal application, is really about net new development. How do I create new ways of interacting with my community, with my user base, that are built out as cloud-based applications from scratch? And so what we're going to see from Erik now from Epicor, which is a leading ERP application, is how kind of a third class of applications, which is about information access and how I make remote access to information that's stored within the four walls, traditionally within what we traditionally think about as the ERP application running within the corporate boundaries. How do I now extend that information out in ways that really make sense for remote users and increase the population within my organization that has access and can make use of the data that lives in the ERP system? So turn it over to Erik.
Thanks. Am I on? Oh, good. My name is Erik Johnson. I'm a Director of Research at Epicor Software. And Epicor is the 6th largest ERP provider worldwide. We're primarily on Microsoft platforms, so we bring a lot of people to PDC. We're headquartered in Irvine, California, so all the culture in California goes to places like San Francisco and Hollywood and San Diego, where I'm from, and it gets sucked out of Irvine pretty much. If you've been there, you'll know what I'm talking about. But we have about 3,000 employees, going to do just over $500 million in revenue this year. And we specialize in manufacturing and distribution and retail and professional services. So we are ERP. We're the big black box application that makes SIs a lot of money. We have a lot of awards. I won't go through them, because we want to get to the main part here. This is important, though. What I want to talk about a little bit is in our key industries, which are financial services and manufacturing, what's the relationship between SaaS and the cloud, and especially the new cloud initiatives. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the issues that we've been facing for about 7 or 8 years. And the internet isn't brand new. The concept of running applications over the internet isn't brand new, but we've been seeing some issues about strategically how companies are using these things. So our bread and butter is in the mid-market, and so we compete, at the large end there, we compete with SAP and Oracle. In the middle, Sage, Lawson, and at the bottom, we compete a little bit with Dynamics. But that's our bread and butter. And one of the issues, the important issues here are very, very low TCO. And I'm going to talk about TCO in a little bit. And the other thing is about customers in this segment need a little bit of a sounding board on where they're going to take technology. And we've been very, very pragmatic about technology, especially about SaaS and some of these other things. And that's sort of helped us maintain a 94% customer retention rate year over year, quarter over quarter. So you're going to see this slide a lot, I have a feeling, at this event. And you can see we got on-premise versus hosted. And you'll see ERP right here all the time. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why is that. So if you've ever seen an Intel x86 architecture, they put the protection rings, ring 1, ring 2, ring 3, all that around the very core of this chip. This is an enterprise, and at the very heart of the enterprise is the financial state. And all of the transactions that go around what is the state of my business are actually sort of like protection rings. And it's not that any technology figured this out. This is business practice. You have to declare your books at the end of every single quarter if you're a public company, and the transaction trail from how my GL adds up all the way out to how did I do my planning for my supply chain logistics are all connected outwards. So in ERP applications, these things are very, very tied together. So when it comes to any kind of disruption in any of these rings, you can kind of see as you start on the outside, when I say disruption, by the way, I don't mean the lights going out. I don't mean a SaaS provider having a down day. I'm actually talking about even just control of the data. I need to do a SQL query or some kind of an access query or some kind of query to project data in a new way. And if I can't do that because my data is out somewhere and I don't have that kind of control, it can actually impact efficiency. And this is in the eyes of our customers. This is not us telling anybody this. We had a customer meeting last week, and this is effectively what we've heard. But as you start going inside, your productivity starts to get crippled if you can't process orders. You can still be in business, but your productivity goes down. Any kind of disruption here, and you're not a viable business anymore. So invoices, material, cash, if you don't know exactly where you stand in that particular ring, you're almost dead. And if you actually lose control of your ledger, you go to jail in the world of Sarbanes-Oxley, because you actually have to sign that you know the state of your business. So if we throw a graph on top of all this about moving ERP functions out of this world and into the cloud, we have to be very, very careful about what we tell our customers is the right thing and the wrong thing to do. It has nothing to do with selling software. It just simply has to do with just maintaining a good reputation and keeping an industry moving. So throw this graph on here. It's kind of a weird graph. I'm not sure if this is going to make sense. But in terms of tolerable risk to intolerable risk, the line looks like this. So what you'll see is this outer ring, CRM, expediting, supply chain logistics, you're starting to see point solutions, and have been seeing, especially in CRM, point solutions doing quite well in a SaaS environment. But as you take things into that circle, the amount of functionality that comes out of an enterprise and is actually being worked outside the firewall goes down dramatically because the risk is simply too high still. And it's a practical matter. One of the ones that comes up all the time is, what about payroll? We send our payroll to ADP all the time. That's different. It works great, but I'm just shoving a bunch of transactions out to a bureau that is going to do my checks and send me a report back. The state of my business hasn't really moved. So up till now, we've looked at the cloud in sort of three different ways. There's managed services, which are easy to get into. You can just give me an operating system image. It's running in a virtualization somewhere, and I can put anything out there. We use this internally. We use this for testing. We use it for any time we don't want to buy a box, and it works well. Our customers haven't really gone there yet because the SLAs, the service level agreements in managed services, aren't robust enough yet. There's no mediation for when things do go down. Also, if I'm running in a straight virtualized host, someone else could put a piece of code in their virtualized host that poisons the virtualization up the chain and actually takes my stuff down. And that's the reason the SLAs aren't that strong yet, because you're giving people very, very low-level access to the virtualized components of the system. So we do a lot with managed hosts. Some of our customers will say, I'll buy a box, put it in, we'll lease space from Rackspace or another provider like that, and we've gotten some traction there. But and it's got a higher service quality. You can put anything you want on there, but you haven't given up really a lot of the management functions. And then finally, we have subscription SaaS, which has an extremely high startup investment for an ISV. Subscription SaaS solutions are great if you have the critical mass in a particular functional area. So CRM, Salesforce, some of the lean manufacturing places. There's some out there. But what we need is some middle ground that's cheap for people to actually use. And that's where a cloud platform comes in. Because what we can do is we can really just put out an application. We can give a binary to one of our customers that they themselves can put out on the cloud. A simple .NET app to say, manage outside processing if you're a manufacturer, collaboration between two partners. And we don't have to, as a provider, create a $15 million data center somewhere to try to sell something at $4.95 a user a month and recoup that investment only after we get enough critical mass. we can get those collaborations working independently of anybody bottlenecking it by simply going out on .NET services. So just to summarize that for ERP a little bit, this is our world. For subscription SaaS, we do see this outer ring, people picking point solutions and choosing to use some specialized SaaS offering, and that's great. The integration is relatively sort of over the wall, send me customers, send me some schedules, and any disruption and the cost of integration is tolerable. And then inside the rings, you'll see shadowed services. So it's interesting, there's not a SaaS AP application out there. What our customers are doing, they just completely outsource their entire AP department. So it's the people as well. It's business process outsourcing. They've jumped the whole SaaS idea and have gone with just move that part of my department out and make all those nasty phone calls, or in case of accounts receivable, but with the experts, So, so we've got outer ring is a good fertile spot for us. Inside, in selected sort of areas that are sort of shadowed from the basic state of the business, and then this third category is collaborative apps, extending reach to employees. And just as a little side note there, especially when things are looking a little bit recessionary, one of the ways that companies expand their value if they can't go get more business is they create value through partnerships. That's how manufacturing survived the 70s and 80s, was they switched to lean manufacturing, which encouraged partnerships to strategic suppliers, and they automated those links to help create value. The two companies together could do something that brute force competition couldn't do before. And so it's really important that economies where the majority of the enterprises out there are small and medium business, they need to be able to get the collaboration working without having to wait for some large SaaS provider to sort of get them to sign up. They need to be able to do it for themselves. So cloud platforms for us, as I've just said, cloud platforms for us, you can actually skip the one and go to the bottom here. The main thing for Epicor was, as an ISV, we could put an application out there, charge our customers for access, and go that way. But we're really looking at licensing an application to our customers that they can deploy for themselves. I mean, we can seriously bundle it in with the ERP suite to say, here's your outside processing collaboration application. Here's your enterprise search collaboration tool. And these customers can deal with the contract for data access and for the data space. And that's what I really wanted to encourage everybody here to think about, is not being the next big SaaS provider, but just giving reach to existing customers. So this is what we did, and I'll find out if we have time for the demo here in a minute. Let me know. But we have an application. We have an ERP application, and one of the capabilities we added to it was basic search. So if you've ever used an ERP application, you'll know that there's 15 levels of menus that take you, and you're trying to figure out where that screen is that tracks customers or finds the inventory level, whatever. So we added a bit so that we added a crawler, and so you can just sort of do a live type search. We just put in my orders yesterday, or do the same exact kind of search you would do if you were looking for something on the internet. Rank it and bring it back. So we give an internet search experience. I don't know if anybody here knows who Pat Helland is. He's a famous Microsoft architect and a real hero of mine. But one of the things he did a long time ago is categorize data, category data, resource data, transactional data, and we use that. We call it the Pat Helland categorization to rank our results, because in ERP, when you're putting in something like Microsoft Corporation, chances are you're trying to find a customer before you're trying to find all the journal entries to payments to Microsoft. So it forms a pyramid very, very nicely. So anyway, we've added this search to our system, and the very first thing people wanted to do was access it outside the firewall. And the problem with that is now you've got to deal with the VPN issues. If I'm on a mobile device, in fact, my company, my mobile device, I'm pointing the microphone like it's my mobile device. You notice that? Our phones can't actually get into the VPN because of the VPN solution we use, for example. So what we did was we said, let's just take these indexes that get created. Actually, I think I have a discussion about that. Create these indexes. There's three main indexes, three main tables that get generated currently in SQL Server, and we'll upload those to the cloud. And we'll set up a website out there using Azure to go and basically bring up that data. I'll get into the details, but this is basically what this does. It's very, very simple. We create three tables that say, here's a crawl, here are the hits. locations, mappings, we've got records, and then we've got a word hash. It's not doubly hashed, that bullet changed, but we have a word hash that keeps track of the words, so you can do wildcard searches, so you can put in part A, B, C, star, and it can go find those very, very quickly. And what the system actually does is you put something in up top, and you can sort of guess what this would do is it stems the input, figures out dates, decimals, things like that from the input that are put in, so I can find orders from October 1st. Selects the hits out of the database, and then basically builds the page. It's very, very straightforward. This is the functionality that we moved to Windows Azure. So in doing it, we basically replaced the code that currently called these three tables and did the queries with code instead that went through and pulled this data out of Azure. And I'm going to go through sort of how we did this. There's really two parts to doing this. One was, inside of Azure, I can't open a connection to a SQL Server database at this time, a full-fledged relational database like I could. So I have to use the storage mechanism that comes as part of Azure that has all of the underpinnings in it to be, have geo-affinity so that if I have data that can't leave the EU legally, I can configure it that way. If I have data that needs to be in multiple places so that I can reduce the latency from my UK office and my San Francisco office, all that's configured, and the Azure storage system can run with all of those constraints. So there's two kinds of data storage other than a queue. In classic storage in Azure, one is called blob storage and one is called table storage. The idea behind a blob storage originally was my pictures and videos go in there. And table storage, and the whole thing comes into memory at once. Table storage, you select the rows you need. It's a key value pair. It's a list of key value pairs with an index somewhere in the back end. I'm sure there's other sessions on that bit. But the bigger issue was, once you're in Azure, you're not on a classic Windows OS anymore. So doing things like getting the current thread ID, creating kernel objects like mutexes, aren't allowed anymore because the whole point of this thing is to make sure that it's solid. It's a sandbox that everybody's going to stay up and live, and that's why we get the strong service level agreements out of Azure, is because they're running in a host protection mode, if you're a .NET junkie, host protection mode that seals off, we actually called it cauterizing, seals off access to some of the API calls that make no sense when you're not on a box of your own. So that was actually one of the issues we had to do. And these were early bits, so there's some issues in there. So there's no file system access because there is no file system. So if you have code in there that tries to open a file, it will fail. We also had to create custom serialization routines, but I think that's going to not be a problem because it uses pointers. It uses pointers to memory. So our tables in SQL, we basically moved them to table storage. They created an index, which was just a dictionary. So the little green things are blobs, and the other ones are tables. So that's basically what we did, is just pulled them into those structures. And then we basically kept 92% of the code. Just had to, add the new lines to deal with the new storage bits. Lots more lines to deal with custom serialization. And it took about 64 hours, only because we like base 8 numbers. But so yeah, the main issues were, the other thing we did was we raised a WCF endpoint, and getting that configured was a little tricky. But effectively, it worked. There's 30,000 lines of code in the entire bit of the application, and we only had to touch the storage bits and then go through and seal off the things that were doing, event log access, and get hash code. We had to do our own version of get hash code for string, because even though they both return in 64 and 32-bit hash codes for a given string are different, and you need to know those things when you're pushing data up to a cloud, which is 64-bit. So our takeaways were that the cloud platform is a big deal for us, because we struggled figuring out how to put SaaS out there when our customers really didn't want it in certain key areas, but they still needed to get some cloud capabilities and some collaboration and reach outside of their own firewall. Virtualized OS stacks like EC2 are great. We use them for all kinds of little things all over the place. We don't want to buy machines, but I can't sell product on them with the same kinds of high quality service that we need. I mentioned the cloud storage capabilities. It's nice to have something that's .NET. It's very REST oriented if you're a REST fan, and then the geo affinity features are really helpful for us because we have those constraints. So the main reason we moved our search capability to the cloud was to get reach for all employees, not just to think about getting stuff out there for the people who are on their laptops and mobiles or traveling all over the country and doing that, but every single employee should be able to get to the stuff they use every day, from wherever they are. Because people are starting, to blur those lines when they're at home. They think about the way they use the internet, they think about the way they use computers, and they want it to be the same way and be just as productive at home as they are at work. So we want to make sure that everybody that works on a shop floor or whether they're a mobile sales rep can get to exactly the data they would get to on a normal day-by-day basis if there's a reason for it. And the nice thing about, the other nice thing is we say collaboration without lock-in. If we had a SaaS point solution, everybody would have to run the exact same thing all the time because that's the only way you can manage a SaaS application. This lets us give a little bit of freedom to our customers who can then put their .NET developers on extending their collaborative apps without necessarily having to come back to us to figure out how to host all of those customizations. And that's my pitch.
So I think we've got a couple minutes left.
Does that make sense? I hope it made sense.
We have a couple minutes left. I think we ought to move to Q&A, give you guys a chance to ask some feedback. A couple key takeaways here. 92% use. We're talking about .NET development environment, .NET development skills, transferable, the ability to take an on-premises application and extend it and move functionality to the cloud where applicable. So you define those boundaries, rather than having the entire application moved outside of the four walls. You decide where that boundary exists and how you want to give access outside the four walls. So two great partners, two very different but very impactful examples. Both of them are real. They're both, in the Epicor case, you saw that they are planning on commercial availability when Azure Services Platform launches. With Infosys, they are continually innovating and building on the automotive platform, and these exist today. So these are proof of concepts in that we've been working kind of pre-announced with them. But they're real applications. So with that, I invite Jitendra and Erik up to kind of answer questions. And for those of you who want to see the Epicor demonstration, it's going to be shown in the Azure Lounge. It's also up here on the laptop and kind of in between sessions. Perhaps you can come take a look. But if you gentlemen want to answer a couple questions, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. I thank everybody for their time.
So it's odd because everybody would love not to have their server right in front of them and carrying and feeding and the backups and all of that. That clearly is something that they want to get rid of. The trick with getting everything into the cloud and deploying everything into the cloud, if we were going to do that right now, we'd probably do it with managed hosts or managed services. For example, the Amazon partnership. Because that's what the value of that is. They own their whole stack. They own the security domain. They own all the admin. They just don't have to deal with the hardware, and it should scale, and we need to see that, assuming the service level agreements are business quality. So those are the two key things. We might see some traction there. It's been too early. I mean, the partnership was just announced. In general, moving the entire ERP suite or a good portion of the ERP suite to the cloud, we get mixed feedback on. Some people just really want to have that SQL data close. And so if we put it on the cloud, then we have to figure out a way to keep data streaming back to something so they can just do ad hoc querying. And then when you start to add BI and cube management and all of that, and then the SharePoint management to show the cubes, it goes on and on and on and on. Does that make sense?
Sorry,
Yeah.
my company's in the medical industry,
Mm-hmm.
and what we found is that they insist on keeping everything local. They're not too interested in pushing too much out.
Mm-hmm.
But we can certainly see that when I'm from Australia, so it's very different to here, where we're what's called a federation. So each state sort of all maintains their own medical records. So when someone is interstate, there are issues with being able to get access to their records. So there is government initiatives to put this sort of thing together, but it comes down to then each state and each particular organisation then also to an actual federal level. So it sort of ends up now with two lots of data on the cloud, like so.
Right. No, it's a push me pull you there, exactly, because people want to put something centralized so that it's easy. You don't have to reconnect all the dots every time you have some pathway to get to some data you need. But at the same time, there's constraints that say you're not allowed to push data beyond some barrier, whether it's jurisdictional, geographic, or those sorts of issues. And those need to get sorted out. We're doing some things on cloud-based applications in Australia right now, and it's weird because there's government funding for doing things that seem to be against the law at the moment. Yeah.
How do you discern like what is and isn't? Like, it's a very difficult decision.
It's a very industry-specific question, and what works in medical won't work in certain other places. It works in, and frankly, anytime we've seen integration take off, and it's always been through a vertical channel. So you saw in automotive, those guys will stitch together their specific needs across, some kind of boundary, supply chain in this case. And in medical, you're going to see some practices, basically start the program, bring in the pharmaceuticals, bring in the government, bring in the single payer. It's going to be something like that. And it's hard to know. I'm not an expert at that. But it is going to be vertical.
So we'll just say that what we might find is that it's going to be like the optional procedures,
Mm-hmm.
like eye surgery or sort of prosthetic type work that will probably be much popular.
Right.
Happy to adopt it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right, right. Sure.
Any more questions? Yes, sir.
Sorry, just recommend from the first question on service level agreements. Is there any, I know this is early stages, is there a key takeaway as in service level, as in have you done any search into the change, for example, application will take X and it's going to take X minus 200 milliseconds, and I'm being very specific here, but I'm curious, any thoughts on how do you renegotiate the service line agreement you already have with the platform to the cloud?
Well, first off, the first question is how are the service level agreements going to be monetized? So in other words, how do I build a business plan around Azure? And don't have that information yet. It's still being worked through.
So we've done a lot of work on the business plan. At this stage, that's not, this is our developers conference. We're
Right.
going to focus on the platform and the development environment. Stay tuned for more information on what we're doing in terms of a business level. But it's not going on in a vacuum. There's work with our partners, work with our customers in terms of what we do, and we do have specific business planning going on. It's just at this particular time.
And the only reason I bring it up is because latency is maybe one piece of there's also the X number of nines in keeping everything alive, and latency might be another piece, and they may be completely independent factors. And I'm just talking about myself. I don't know anything about what Microsoft is thinking there.
So I would just
Yeah.
make the comment that there's kind of really two things at play here. One is SLA, and this is just a general statement. One is SLA, service level agreement, which is really what happens if something falls down, right? What are we going to pay you if something falls down? The second is actually the more interesting, more important, which is quality of service, which speaks to your discussion of how fast and how well we are at operating to your requirements. And again, both of those are things that.
So, sorry,
That's-
just to touch on that, when are you expecting to release that information?
I don't have that at this time. I'm sorry.
Sure.
I want to clarify, to kind of imply that the data that is pushed to the cloud services is not something that you can back up easily. Is this
No, I'm sorry. The question is, I implied that the data that gets pushed in the cloud cannot be backed up easily, or?
yeah, because
Okay. Right. So I was talking specifically about if I was to go lease some space, rent some space on Amazon EC2, and run our ERP application, it doesn't really save you the headache of getting your data back local. Yeah, I think they do actually back up. They basically suspend everything. But the problem in ERP is it's not just good enough to suspend everything. I may have completely botched my payroll run or my checks or my journals or something, and I need to actually wind back to a point in time and do it again. And that's much more difficult to do when effectively they're taking an image and just spinning it down and bringing it back up and scaling it up, right? So it comes back to the control of data. And you're sort of in control of, I mean, you get that, but it's not the same as having it local.
And what I would add to that is there's an inherent difference between taking an existing application and moving it out to a hosted environment, a managed hosted environment, and actually architecting for running an application on a cloud platform. And so what we were talking about this morning is more of the latter, which is how do you actually build an application for the cloud platform versus how do I just take an existing ERP system and put it out on the cloud. And even when you do something like that, take an existing application and move it out to a cloud platform, there are inherent differences in how those two environments operate, which Eric's getting at. And so it's not always straightforward to be able to do the same things that you had on premise with your application just porting to the cloud.
Right. You have to think stateless messages from the outset. That's the best way to go. And then you also have to think load balancing. Where am I keeping state, cache, all that sort of stuff, and how do I coordinate that because there's more than one instance happening. And if you've already done that, and a lot of people that come to this conference have been doing those sorts of things for some time, you're sort of halfway there, really.
So with that, I think we will go ahead and close. I really appreciate your time, Jitendra and Erik.